Dan with Flarespace, and today we're assembling and installing these two racks on the back of the Sprinter van. These are the nVader racks. We have the driver's side on this side, the passenger side over here, as well as all of the brackets and hardware that are needed to install this, as well as the instruction manuals for both as well. Alright, so we're going to start the assembly and install with the passenger side, or the right-hand side of the vehicle. That is simply because these two holes set up for where you would put the driver's side or left-hand side. Those holes will actually line up with the two parts that are holding this badge in place. If you're just installing the driver's side, you'll install that bracket first, and then that will help you line up everything for your single hole that you have to drill when you install just the driver's side. So we're going to install parts G. These are both called G. And then part D here. Part D is going to slip in right behind this. All the slots are going to line up. And then these parts as well are going to associate with the slots here. Make sure that when you do this, you're going to put your carriage bolts from the outside to the inside on everything. And then also make sure that D is in place before you bolt G in, because otherwise you're going to undo that step. Okay, so we've got these installed. As we did it, we made sure that we actually tightened up the two that are holding this bracket in place along with these. That sets everything up to be in the correct location before we tighten the rest of these down. All right, so next we're gonna put a piece of foam right here. It's got adhesive back on it already. This is just gonna prevent any wear between this piece here and the actual hinges on your van. Prevent rust, prevent powder coat chipping, all sorts of things like that. Just put that about right there, nice and even. So next up, we're actually going to put the foot itself in place. It's going to go right like that. Then the badge is going to go over top of it. And then we're going to put our bolts through that whole thing. And again, the hardware, the bolts or the nuts and the washers will go on the back side. Sometimes it may be easier to flip this over at this point or just kind of stand it up when you actually put the hardware on there. Alright, so we've got our part E here attached to the bottom of the rack. When we did this, we made sure that we had these two bolts we tightened up first, then we did this inside piece, and then lastly, these two bolts here. Of note is that these two are going from kind of the top to the bottom with the hardware at the bottom. This one, the inside, that's coming from the outside of the bottom towards the inside with the hardware right inside of here. That's kind of important. And lastly, we have our piece of foam tape, just making sure we are having protection up against the body of the van. We're not scratching any paint. All right, next up, we've got part F and part C to be bolted on here. We're gonna put this one on the outside of the rack, this way. And then this part here goes on the outside of all of that, but it's kind of hard to hold it all together. So what we're gonna do is bolt this piece on, just leave these two bolts out. That way, everything's nice and in position, and we can just put this one on kind of after the fact. All right, so we're gonna install this part now. The important thing to note here is these are the only two bolts that are not 3/4 inch in length. These are actually 1 inch, and it's because they're going through so many pieces of metal, it's gonna be a little bit longer. So all these we've installed previously are all 3/4, and these are the two 1 inch parts here. If you've done everything right, it'll all line up on both sides. So next up, we're going to install this bumper spacer. It goes on the inside of the rack, and it basically just keeps everything still against the van while you slam the doors. It keeps everything still. Make sure you have the actual spacer on this side. It goes in, and then we'll actually just put the nut and all that on the bottom side. But again, make sure you have that spacer there to have everything set to the right height. So we switched over to the driver's side now. Very similar. I'm going to take these two pieces that came with this part of the kit. One is going to go right there. The other one is going to go there. We'll bolt those on along with this piece, and that goes in place. Again, make sure you want to do these 2 bolts first, then you're going to do those 2 bolts, and then you're going to do the other 4. That'll get that set. Up after that, we're going to install this lower bracket here. It'll go on just like that. And again, we're going to do the bolts from the outside. We're going to tighten those up first. They're going to go from the top to the bottom. The inside one goes bottom to top, and then we'll finish out the plate piece on the back side, and then it's 2 bolts that hold it in place as well. After that, we'll switch over and do this last piece over on the front here, and it basically gets bolted in right about here. That'll basically wrap up the entire installation of this, very similar to the passenger side, without too much effort. So we'll go ahead and get going on that. Alright, so we've got this one all done. This is the driver's side of the van. So we've got our 2 stiffener bars up here, along with the extra bracket that goes on the back side there. We also put on this plate here as well as the lower bracket and nameplate. And then lastly, this little bumper. It's slightly different than the other side, where the other side had it down here. It's got a vertical slot for this one on the driver's side. So we're going to start installing this passenger side nVader rack now. First thing we have to do is take off the factory Mercedes badge. There are 2 Torx bolts here, and then it's actually kind of like stuck on here as well with a little bit of glue. So we'll take those out and then basically snap this off. We'll do that right now. Scary part. Alright, so now that we have the Mercedes badge off, we're going to go ahead and tape up this area just to prevent any nicks or damage happening or mounting and moving the rack around. This black area is not paint coming off. This is actually the adhesive that was sticking the other part on there. So this will be totally normal, just like yours. Alright, so now that we have the outside of the door painted off and protected, or taped off and protected, it's time to put the actual bolts that are going to hold the racks on in place. So this is kind of this little strange part here. It's a washer and kind of a bolt retainer, and it is going to go in place right up here in that area. And then we've also got another one for the lower section that's going to go down here for the square plate. It's going to go in there like that. Now, the trick to all this is to keep those in place when we mount the outside rack. One of the best ways to do that is take a little bit of foam out of the packaging, just cut it out what you need, and this literally kind of drops in right there. We'll tape this in place. There's another one for the top, right up there, and again, we'll just tape these in place so when we close the door, all the bolts are actually held right there for us. Okay, so we put the foam on the back side of these bolts here, and then close the door with everything taped inside. So now everything is nice and secure. Nothing is rattling around. We have one of these spacers. I've already put some foam on the back side of it. Again, all we're doing is protecting the body of the vehicle. I'm gonna put that on there just like that. And now we're pretty much ready to hang the whole passenger side part. So we hung this up here, and then the next thing we did is we just basically put these on loose, just so this rack isn't going to come off. Then we worked our way over to here, and we installed these 2 screws along with the lock washers, and then bolted them onto this plate on the back side. This part is what's lining everything up, so make sure this is tight first, and then go adjust everything over there. Also, make sure this is nice and centered in this. So when you actually close this, it's going to be lining up inside of this opening. All right, so we skipped ahead just a little bit. We went ahead and we put our hangers, or all the bolts and things in here, just like we did on the other side. We left this attached here, and we went ahead and we also cut out this little template. It comes in your instructions. Probably don't want to cut it out until you've already installed the other side, but what this is going to do is it'll go inside of here, just like that basically. And we are going to locate where we're going to drill the hole. And all we're going to do is basically line up this edge with this side, and the top and the bottom the same way. And then we're going to take either a punch or some type of marker if you want to drill that out, and basically just put that right there. And that's going to be the location that we go and drill the next hole. So we've got our door marked, but before we actually drill the hole here, you're going to want to take the actual inside panel off. To do that, you're basically going to pop the corners loose and then start working your way around all these pull tabs. Go ahead and start that process now. See if I can do the first one for you guys, and then we will move on. Now that we've got the interior panel popped out, we're not going to drill anything and damage it. We'll go ahead and drill our hole. We're going to use a 1/8 inch pilot bit, and then the instructions call for a 25/64. That's going to be just over a 3/8 bit. So if you don't have it, you can run like a 3/8 bit in there, and then kind of wiggle it around a little bit just to give a little bit more slack for that 3/8 bolt that's going to go into that hole. Alright, so anytime you drill any holes in the body of a vehicle, you always want to make sure that you put some primer on that. What I'm using today is basically the self-etching primer, so it actually eats into it and gets a really good bond. The best way to do it is probably to tape all this off, and then you just basically open that one hole up and shoot it real fast on both sides, and then peel your tape back. I've actually already done that, so you can kind of see how clean that actually is inside of there. Alright, so we've got this one kind of loosely mounted. We went ahead and we started all of the bolts on here so it won't fall off. And we've got this elevator bolt running through the hole we just drilled. But what we need to do now is secure everything on the inside. So it should come around these two things. So we've got this part here. I went ahead and also put on a little bit of foam tape on here. This is going to slide over the bolt on the inside. And then this standard kind of acorn nut or a nylon locking nut and the washer are going to go on that. Easiest way here is go ahead and put the actual hardware on first, get it started, and then slide this on as you're tightening it up. Alright, getting pretty close to the end. We're going to put this, essentially it's a rigidizing bracket for this door. When you put that tire on there and a bunch of other weight, and this door is also holding the weight of the other one, it tends to kind of have an issue with holding all that. So we put this bracket in, and it stiffens up this whole area. The way you line it up, basically there's two large holes. You're going to line just like that. We're going to drill out all these holes, and then we'll actually put all the nuts and bolts on there. But this bracket here will actually be slipped inside the door, and then it'll actually be the nut plate for all of these holes. But again, first things first, we align it up. We're just kind of tape it in place in order to locate everything. Just like that. Move around first. Right there. Alright, so we've got our holes drilled for this bracket. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we prime all those holes just so we don't have any rust issues down the road. bracket is all in here. All the bolts are tight, ready to go. The only thing we have to do now is actually snap on this cover. If you remember before, I was taking off these little red or the orange parts that were on the door still. The reason is these are actually going to be slipped back into their slots here on the actual door, and then we can install the whole door back on it in place. With this bracket installed and all the bolts tight, we're pretty much done with this installation. The only thing we have to do now is actually pop this panel back on. We had removed all the remaining orange pieces from the door that stayed behind. We'll go ahead, we'll slide them into their kind of locations on each one of these, and then we'll just pop it back on. All right, final touches. Mercedes badge right in the back. You have this little trim ring piece. We'll slide him in first, just like that. Open this up so I can get a little better access to things. And then just snap him in place, just like that. Make sure he's square. Good to go. All right, so once we actually get these racks installed, the centers and everything, and then had tightened these out, we torque all of these outside bolts down to 30 foot-pounds. So that's an important thing to do. If you're just using impact, a lot of times it won't do it quite enough. So just make sure you're going and running around and doing 30 foot-pounds on all of these 8 bolts on the outsides, and you should be pretty good to go. All right, so we got both of the nVader rear racks on, both the driver side and passenger side. You can get these things as individual sides, or you can do the whole thing like this. Pretty simple install. One bolt, right, or one screw right here that goes through the factory sheet metal that is not an original hole. Other than that, everything bolts right up to all the factory locations. Thanks for watching, guys.